see Lindelof videos, how to find the domain of a function. I could actually scream when I think of how teachers and professors describe this stuff, because I swear they're reading it right out of the dictionary or right off of Wikipedia or wherever they are. Say, it's the set of x values for which the function is defined. My gosh, it makes it worse than it was when we started. This is how I look at domain. I look at domain this way. I start with the function. What function? The function, whichever one I see. So I see this function, for example. And then I ask myself, what do I know about, in this case, the square root function? So we could just do a little experiment. We could say, okay, well, what's the square root of 25? I don't care what the square root of 25 is, but does it exist? And the answer is yes, so that makes sense. I say, okay, I take the square root of 0. Yeah, the square root of 0 makes sense because the square root of 0 is 0. That makes sense. Well, okay, well, what if I do this square root of negative 3? Or let's make it negative 16. Negative 16, does that exist? No. You can't take the square root of a negative number because it's impossible. No number times itself is a negative. Therefore, I know something here. This tells me what's not possible. And it's not the negative 16 it doesn't work. It's all negative numbers. So isn't it true that you can't take the square root of a negative number? I can hear you so hopefully saying yes. So I'd say to you the domain is all the other numbers. So I would say the domain is all numbers greater than or equal to 0. I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? Hopefully that does. The other way you could write that is you could write x such that x is greater than or equal to 0. Be careful not to say positive numbers because 0 is not a positive number. Hopefully you're starting to see when they ask for domain how you look at it. It's not an event. It's a process. Some functions are different than this. This is a square root function, so I say, okay, I know that there can be no negative number in here. So whatever's in here has got to be at least 0. So that's the domain. What numbers work in there? What numbers give a real answer? What numbers, for what values of x can I actually get a solution? Because can we agree we can't get a solution for square root of negative 16. Therefore, it's outside the domain. All right? So you get your next question, and next question says this is, okay, g of x is equal to 1 over x minus 2. So you say, well, crap, Charlie, what would I do with that? Well, are you aware that any number over 0 is undefined? That is, makes no sense, cannot be solved. Because that's what domain is. Domain says, for what values of x can we solve the problem? So look at this for a second. I know that this is not okay. This, 0 down here, without regard to what's on top of it, is undefined. It's a domain issue. So I'm looking at this function differently. I'm saying, okay, what do I know about rational functions? Well, I know that the denominator can never total 0. So I go back to the problem I have. I say, okay, Charlie, this is the function of a rational function. I know that this thing down here, I know that this bit down here can never total 0. So I just asked myself that question. When would it total 0? So I just pull this piece out for a second. I say, okay, when is x minus 2 equal to 0? Some quick algebra, I realized, hey, if x was equal to 2, that thing would equal 0. So if x was equal to 2, we'd have 2 minus 2 is 0. We'd have 1 over 0. Undefined. Makes no sense. So, professor says, Charlie, what's the domain of this function? I realize that if x is equal to 2, this thing doesn't work. So I say, my domain, you write the d like this, my domain is all x I'm trying to figure out how to spell except x equal to 2, or all x, comma, x cannot equal 2. And that's it. So that's how domain works. And then, oh my gosh, and then we get thrown off by this. Your professor says to you, okay, well, here's our h of x function. Say h of x is 3x plus 1. What's the domain? This is the one that throws everybody off because they're like, okay, Charlie keeps saying, find out what number doesn't work. What number doesn't work here? Go in assuming that all numbers work and then see if there's some reason that it wouldn't. Any number works here. Positive numbers work here? Sure. Negative numbers work here? Sure. Right? F of 0, does that work? Yeah. 3 times 0 plus 1 equals 1. That's it. 1 is an answer. How about positive numbers? What, h of 1? Yeah. 3 times 1 plus 1 is equal to 4. 4 is a real answer. It exists, doesn't it? It doesn't come back undefined or makes no sense. This thing came back undefined when we put in 2. This one, so okay, better check negative numbers. H of negative 3. We'll try that. 3 times negative 3 plus 1 is equal to, well, this is negative 9 plus 1 is negative 8. Is that right? Negative 8. Is negative 8 a number? Sure it is. That works. So what's the domain of this function? Domain. All x. All numbers work. I hope this is helpful. What I hope you really got from this video is that when you're asked the domain question, don't think of a specific answer. Start with the question. Start with the question. What kind of function do I have? And then ask yourself what you know about that function. Do you have a square root function? Well, we know that this number in here can never be negative. Right? Do we have a rational function? If we have a rational function, we know that the denominator may never total 0. So what number makes the denominator total 0? Here we have a polynomial function, and we know that now we hopefully know that polynomials are always defined. The other exception is where a problem defines it. If I said to you, how many apples can you buy at the store? Assuming there's an endless number of apples. Well, you could buy 0 apples, 1 apple, maybe 1,000,000 apples. So you might say that you could buy, but you couldn't buy negative apples. Maybe you couldn't buy half apples. So your domain would come out differently there. Please ask me questions. Tell me how it's going for you. I want you to understand domain. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. And if you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe. Thanks.